Hi, I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Operation Freedom platform. Every Sunday from 2 to 5 Eastern, you can stream our radio show live by going to davejanda.com. Now, if you miss the show, well, we always have the podcast available by 8 p.m. every Sunday evening at davejanda.com, and it's part of our premium service content service and email service, in addition to the 4 to 5 other videos I produce every week on our platform. Now, on the show today, we had Dan Brigman, who is a visionary as it comes to preparedness. Dan started a company, Numana, Numanna.com, that focuses on storable food, water filtration systems, and storable water. When he started this company years ago, he was told, come on, there's not going to be any need for this in throughout the West, Western Europe, United States, Canada. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. And a good example of that is what we experienced this past week around our world. We saw Portugal, Spain, France, I believe a portion of Germany, portion of the UK, Belgium, have grid problems. Their grid went down. And with it, we saw chaos within, actually, it was down for about 12 hours, but within an hour, there were some folks that were even keeled. But there was a lot of chaos. I have friends in some of these countries, and they said, it was amazing how quick people lost it. Lines at stores closed, phone services down. But when it comes down to it, is if you're prepared ahead of time, as Dan Brigman has counseled us over the years, when these events do happen, well, there's a little less chaos in your life because you know you have storable food, storable water, or water filtration system. So I encourage you to be prepared. You know, the old Boy Scout. Be prepared. And a couple of items to have in that category are storable food, water filtration systems, storable water, long-term storable water. There's a difference. And of course, a communication system, and as we've discussed on the financial side, hard assets, precious metals. I want to play a portion of the segment today with Dan because we spoke about this preparedness side of the equation. And I do believe Dan brings out information that each and every one of us needs to implement. He also, by the way, if you do go to Numana, Numanna.com, they have a lot of different discounts going on right now. But in the when you check out, if you use the term Janda, Janda, you get a further discount. So there is a little bonus for stopping by the site. And at a minimum, the way prices are going, there are some folks this week that got in touch with me and said, actually, I didn't really think that me buying storable food years ago was going to be one of the best investments I could have made. Because the price of the food has gone up significantly, good old Bidenomics. And I still got my storable food that I whittle on every so often when I don't particularly want to go to the grocery store. So, again, something to consider. Here's a portion of the interview with Dan when we were discussing about the lights going off, the grid going down, and being ahead of the game.
I don't think so. It's not. I mean, it's always something like that when it happens. It's always surprising, but it's not surprising, if that makes sense. Our biggest enemy in things like this is something called normalcy bias. We've talked about it repeatedly. We think that life as we know it continues on and everything will be normal and there'll only be slight disruptions and nothing like this can happen. We almost can't imagine it. COVID kind of burst that to some extent. But, I have a friend in Spain, a pretty good friend in Spain, and I couldn't even reach him. The power was out. I couldn't reach him, his cell phone, the towers. It was out. I mean, out. It wasn't like, well, our lights in our house won't turn on. No, it's out. Everything in his area was out. And this is what many, I'm sure you've discussed at some point about the power grid, and especially these green energy edicts or mandates or whatever you want to call them, and the vulnerability in the infrastructures. And I would almost say, I mean, if I was going to put a judgment on it, America's infrastructure, electrical infrastructure, is almost more vulnerable than Europe's in many ways, at least parts of it. And no.
Now, people that question that, just think of Texas a couple years ago with those winter storms. Very vulnerable. Very vulnerable. And remember, when you're dealing with systems that can be hacked, anything is possible in any system. So Dan's not over speaking about this. It's not hyperbole. It's actually on target, which is why we need to be prepared, not just in Western Europe, but here in the United States. Dan goes on.
This is a real possibility, and we saw that it happened. I mean, thank God it was relatively short.
So it lasted about 12 hours or so, but the concern was it was going to last several days. So, Dan, what would be the absolute minimum you believe people should have as far as storable food and water filtration system? But in those folks, I was talking to some folks in Portugal, the pumps weren't working, so they couldn't even do water filtration. So having some type of a long-term water supply.
It's a drum I've been beating ever since I've been on your show. Everybody who's listening to my voice should have some sort of water storage and or water filtration. If you live in Michigan, obviously lakes or rivers, streams, whatever, are a lot more readily available than others. So if you have some sort of filter that can handle those, you're good that way. Or you have water storage, which we have on the website. No bacteria, lasts 20 years. It can just store 1 liter bottles. So one of those two things, you have to ask yourself the question: what will you do if, when you turn on your tap, water doesn't come out? Mm-hmm. That's the question you need to ask. What would you do? And if you don't have an answer to it, well, then you're really vulnerable. And if you can answer that question, now you're resilient, in the real meaning of the word resilient, not some, Agenda 2030 type resilient word. You are really resilient. And you have to answer those questions. You have to have minimum, in my mind, especially for food, minimum is bare minimum is 72 to 96 hours. I mean, that's just getting started for everybody in your house, water, what have you. A month is really what I would say is the minimum, just to be very, in a month, if you can be very resilient in a month. The problem with thinking, well, a month I'm taken care of, and many people, even Ready.gov, even many of the governmental agencies, they've recommended 90-day supply. So I'm even being conservative on what I'm telling you. This is the government has come down to, you need to have 90-day supply. So probably the better answer, safer answer, is the 90-day supply.
And Dan, there is a differential amongst storable food, right? Product lines that are available. And I've constantly told folks that the Numana is by far the best storable food line on the planet. And the reason is because the attention to detail that you and your team have provided in providing these meals. Some of these products, when you look around the country, around the world of these different companies, they're heavy into breakfast stuff. They're heavy into fruity drinks, that kind of thing. Dan, educate our listeners in what separates Numana from pretty much everybody else on the planet when it comes to storable food products.
This is really important.
When we first started, to say we didn't know what we were doing, we really didn't have a total vision. We just had kind of a compulsion, and we thought we could do something better. I mean, that's really how we started. And we began to refine what we began to offer, and we met a lot of people in the different, trade shows and what have you, and prepper shows, and they would tell us what they wanted. And that is what you said about these ratios is very important. Some buckets you buy, well, half of it is, oatmeal and, whatever, who knows what else, oatmeal and whatever. A cheap, fine, but you don't want a whole bucket of that, and you need balance of that, and you don't really want to pay for all that in your purchase. So we began to change those ratios and to do something that our audience, our customer base, told us. So that's why we're very confident in the ratios, because this is pretty much exactly what people told us that they want. So a good mix of lunch and dinners with a light on the breakfast, no sugary drink mixes in there at all, powdered milk options, and the powdered milk actually tastes good. Water options, water filtration options, meat options, those things. That's what we focused on, and meals that actually taste good. I like to eat. If I didn't like it, we didn't want to sell it. And that was the crux of our philosophy, and that's what we went for, and that's how we put things together.
And that's key. From a nutritional standpoint, you want the biggest bang for the buck when it comes to your nutrition and for your energy, right? Because you're already under stress with the system coming down. In addition to a power grid issue, one of the other concerns that we addressed in the interview as well is, tariffs can be fine, and especially reciprocal tariffs. But a concern that we're seeing, that the information I'm getting from contacts and sources I have at ports, specifically on the West Coast, is that the supplies coming into our country are diminishing, very similar to what they saw during COVID. This will create some supply chain issues. It will also, and some folks I know in the trucking industry are telling me that it's going to lead to a number of layoffs and downsizing in trucking companies, if not some bankruptcies in some trucking companies, because they run a very fine line as far as profit. So if they can't bring supplies into our country from China, from, let's say, non-food stuff related, it's going to affect trucking lines, which will affect supply lines as it relates to our food. So it is not hyperbole to say that our supply lines are stretched, and they're going to be stretched more. I'm told that in the next couple weeks, you're going to see some of the major ramifications of the supply issues coming into our country. It was like about 40-day lag in there. Well, now we're getting to that point of the time frame where it is going to become a problem. So prepare. At a minimum, by getting storable food and water filtration systems, you're making an investment, an insurance policy on your food and water supplies. They're not going to go bad. These things last 20 years, for goodness sake. And at a max, you're so far ahead of the curve that you're protected if and when the lights go off, if or when supply chains are affected in a negative manner. I thank you for joining me today. Our entire show is available at davejanda.com. Again, 4 to 5 other video format shows we do every week at davejanda.com. Thank you for joining me. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. Thanks for your time tonight.